Well, thank you. This is really nice. As we're now thinking about this, I actually propose that if there are any questions about this presentation, as it is a bit different than what we're normally talking about, maybe just ask those questions first, because now it's all fresh in our heads. So I open the floors for questions only on this presentation first.
Yes. Well, thank you for the presentation. It's really philosophical, I think. So I would like to ask some clarification on your point. For example, when you say that there is like there are more pressure on ecosystem services in developing countries, then why developing countries, if I understand correctly, you're saying why developing countries should receive the payment because of the pressure and then the degradation are there. But maybe we also have to see it's environmental services as stock. I mean, if we see the stock of biodiversity, stock of biodiversity is the most easier to be compared that, or the forest like in Brazil, in Indonesia, they are much more here. I mean, compared to the biodiversity compared to the one in Europe, because in the past you have like used your forest for the development of your country while the stock are there in the developing countries. What's your perspective on this? And then the second one, when you say about PES and then you compare with the CO2 transaction, but here you have to we have to put in mind that environmental services is like classified through the scale. For example, water in Switzerland, for us in like in China or in Vietnam, we don't really care water in Switzerland, but within the Switzerland itself, within the unit in a country, then water is very important. But I just want to highlight that for sure that there is global markets, but it's only for the one that can be enjoyed globally, like carbon or biodiversity, like intrinsic value for biodiversity conservation. But for water, maybe it only works at national level, even the local level, even the village level. What's your comment on this?
No, you're absolutely right. You have to look at the region, at the level where it works. I focused on the global level because that's also what initiates presently the discussion about payments for ecosystem services from Western companies or a company in the Netherlands to protect ecosystems in countries very far away. And that's partly because of the, let's say, the interest of another country in the global ecosystem services originating from another country. But if ecosystem services work on a smaller level, then the whole story holds also for that smaller level. I agree with you. The other point about the European countries, for example, already having degraded their stock of forests in the past. And that's a very important point, because just as the Western countries have a historical responsibility for the carbon dioxide emissions, which are already emitted in the past, they could also have this historical responsibility for already having chopped their forests. But just as in the case of climate policy, where it's very difficult to include historical responsibility, that might also prove problematic in the case of ecosystem services. Nevertheless, and I'm discussing that at the university, if pressure on ecosystems is not only put by chopping down forests, but also keeping it from growing back again. So if you could show that in European countries there are large areas which, if human activity would be stopped, would recover, then that would also count as a huge impact on ecosystems. I hope I answered the point.
Are there any specific questions on this presentation? Yeah, two.
Yes.
First. Yeah.
Yes, hello. You proposed that PES should be made compulsory. Do you have any suggestions how that can be institutionalized on an international level? How that can be enforced, for instance?
enforced.
You're institutionalized. How can you
Yes.
oblige countries to compulsorily implement PES?
That's, of course, very difficult. You already see it in the climate negotiations. That it's very difficult to get things done on a larger scale. The Kyoto Protocol is already an example of many countries, but of course only developed countries yet, and the intermediate countries. But yes, it has to be done through international negotiations.
Yeah, for instance, the Kyoto Protocol, the United States hasn't signed up,
No.
which is still one of the biggest polluters when it comes
Yes.
to CO2. And basically, it's like you can suggest to enforce it, but it's about power,
Yes.
and then a willingness to these countries to give up some power, and
That's true.
that's a really difficult.
And
Thank you.
it also has to do with how severe the problem is seen by the public, and if climate change would become more visible in the present, then it will be more easy in also to get international negotiations, because you cannot. It's insufficient just to ask other countries to do so, because then you will have the free riders. You need compulsory schemes. But sometimes it can be done, like the hole in the ozone layer. There, global schemes could be developed, but also because less money was involved. It's very difficult. I agree.
Okay, let's keep the questions on this presentation quite short, although it's a philosophical presentation. Just try to keep it technical, just for clarification. So, any other questions to clarify things? Yeah, that was yours.
Thanks for the presentation. It was so philosophical that in the end I didn't really know what to believe anymore. You got me really confused. However, coming back to your example of what if Switzerland was the source of all oxygen in the world? I think for me that would be a very, very nice example, because if it meant that Switzerland was no longer able to do any to keep up any industry, to do any farming, to do any rural development, then I think even if Switzerland is highly developed and a rich country, the world would have to pay opportunity costs, because the currency that I see would be opportunity cost for not being able to use land area in a way that I would like to. So, and if I take this to the developing countries, I would again have, in my eyes, a philosophical justification and a combination of poverty alleviation and ecosystem services.
Well, the problem, of course, there are costs at both sides. You have the opportunity costs on the one side and the damage costs on the other side, and it all depends upon who you believe is responsible to bear those costs. And purely the fact that there are opportunity costs, that their development is hindered, is not sufficient reason to get a claim that you should be paid for the costs you incur. It depends, basically, you could say who was first. And if that oxygen source, for example, what had been used throughout history of this earth, then you could say the global community has a first mover claim to using that oxygen. Purely the fact that the Swiss are in a vicinity does not matter. But it's not clear. You can argue both ways.
Okay, take two more questions on this subject. Who really has two urgent questions? I saw your hand already, so you can have, and then the last one would be, this one was first, okay. Let's have two last questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. Philosophy is very, very important. Maybe PES, the phenomenon of payment for ecosystem services serves as a wake-up call to the world where only money talks. Do you agree that if the polluter pays principle, or you have a PES scheme, it is necessary to establish a monetary value of ecosystem services. So if the polluter pays, you have to establish the value
Yes.
and the price.
Yes,
That's the
I think
same
that's necessary.
as PES. Do
Yes,
you agree?
yes, I agree. And certainly PES is required as a wake-up call, and it has that function. But if everyone is awake and aware,
Mhm.
then different principles can arise. But to get the issue starting, it's very important.
Okay, thank you.
My question is, as I understood, unless there is really damage, there is no need to pay for the ecosystem. No need to pay as a compensation, as I understood. Or you think ecosystem services is there, and someone is consuming those ecosystem services, then consumers should reward for the consumption of the services. If we are just saying polluters should pay, that means encouraging private sectors as well, and not paying for the ecosystem services as a reward payment. What do you think about this?
I'm not completely sure whether I understand your question. Could you repeat?
I mean, polluters means it is only if there is damage.
Yes.
But payment for ecosystem services, it is for the reward money or reward for the ecosystem service, maintaining ecosystem services.
Yes.
So it is a little bit contradicting.
Well, it depends how you look at the ecosystem services. If you look at them as a natural background, like the ozone layer, something which is always there and has been there before humans entered the planet, then altering that state can be considered some kind of pollution, instead of that the humans who came somewhere between this ecosystem are suddenly the owners of it, offering the services which the ecosystems already did before they came there.
But most of the PES are based on the rewarding, I think. People are getting ecosystem services, and the beneficiaries, maybe companies, hydropower companies, or from the, I don't know, maybe UN's climate change, they are paying as a reward. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Maybe we'll discuss.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mark, again.
Sure.
It was really nice.